All right. Well, hello, folks. Welcome to our webinar here. It's just now time, so we're going to give people a few more minutes. We have quite a lot of attendees, and I think quite a few are still just. It looks like they're popping in pretty quickly now. So we'll give them a few more minutes, or another minute or so, before we start the presentation.
Dan, how many people do we have registered for today's webinar?
I think around 180, so pretty pretty substantial crowd, and from all over the world, which is really exciting to see.
Excellent.
All right, I think we can go ahead and get started here, Jackie. So I'm going to start with just a quick introduction. First of all, my name is Dan Rael. I'm one of the founders of CatalogIt. I'm happy to be here, joined by my friend Jacqueline Cabrera. Jacqueline, we're delighted to have presenting today. She is a principal at Cabrera Art and Management. She's a contract registrar, an independent registrar. She's worked with CatalogIt with a number of different kinds of clients. She is a founding board member of the Association of Registrars and Collection Specialists, ARCS. She's also been on the board of the Registrars Committee of Western Region. She has a tremendous amount of experience. She was the Associate Registrar for exhibitions at the J. Paul Getty Museum, and she also worked at the Getty Villa, where she coordinated and negotiated loans and shipments from their collections. She managed their antiquities collection, and I could just go on and on. Jackie has a tremendous amount of experience. We're delighted to have her. So, with that being said, let's just go ahead and dive right in. Jackie, take it
Great.
away there.
Good. So today we're going to talk about shipping artwork and cultural items, and we're going to focus on best practices in fine art shipping. So I know some of you will have limitations with your budget and therefore might have to be a little bit flexible or cut corners regarding budgets. So we'll talk a little bit about that later in the presentation, but keep those questions in mind because there is light at the end of the tunnel if you have strict budget constraints. So why do we ship cultural artifacts around the world? Well, they might be going out on loan for a borrowing institution for one of their exhibitions, or you might be shipping in loans for an exhibition within your own institution. You might also have incoming loans coming in for potential acquisitions. If you have a conservation lab, some museums will bring in works just for their conservation lab to work on. Temporary display, maybe there's a particular object out there that your curator or director wants to have on display to complement something already in your permanent collection. So that's just a sort of the general idea of why you would ship something around the world. Now, how do we ship cultural artifacts? As you can see here, I have air freight and trucking. Now, there are two other options which we will speak about at the end of the presentation. So, in case you're wondering why I haven't mentioned them here. So, what should consider when you're choosing your shipment method? Well, you should just the destination, where it's going to. Is it domestic or international? So, is it within your own country, within your own state, within your own city? What type of of artwork is it? Is it a large sculpture? Is it a painting? Is it a small ceramic piece? Is it a framed photograph, etc.? You should also take into consideration, is this object small or is it oversized? Because that will determine on what size truck or what size plane can accommodate that shipment. Now, condition is it can either be stable or fragile. And I always say if your object is very fragile, then you should seriously consider maybe not shipping it. That's just my personal opinion. But packing method, is it crated or is it soft packed? That will also determine how you can ship something. So first we're going to talk about shipping. Yes, Dan.
Yeah, I was just going to interject really quick, and I forgot to mention this at the very beginning. But if anyone has questions, by all means, um, use the Q&A little box at the bottom. I think most people are familiar with Zoom, but go ahead and feel free to use that Q&A, and we'll try and get to your questions either right at the end of Jackie's or in the course if it makes sense, or at the end. We really intend to we hope to get through all the questions, so feel free to use that. Sorry
Yeah,
to interrupt you there, Jackie.
no, that's good. Good reminder. Okay, so when we're trucking, you need to make sure you understand where you are. Are you shipping it across town? Regional, are you shipping it to the next state? Or are you shipping cross country? Or as in Europe, are you shipping within the EU or is it going out of the EU? And there are various types of trucks that are available for shipping fine art. You have the high cube, the tractor trailer, which is great for cross countries from, for example, Seattle to Miami, New York to Los Angeles. And then you have the straight truck, which is used for shuttles. And fine art shipping companies have schedules on their websites as to when these shuttles occur. Now, my big advice is when you're doing a shuttle to make sure you book it 2 to 3 months in advance because it's a highly sought out shipment method because it's economical and gets your pieces to your location within 2 to 3 weeks at the most. And then you have the Sprinter van, which is really ideal for local shipments, especially at least for out in Los Angeles, we have the Hollywood Hills. And so those are very narrow roads. And then in Europe, they have obviously some very narrow roads there. And so the Sprinter van might be a good option for that. The fifth one, which is not used a lot, but is available, is what we call the lowboy tractor. And this is a large truck with an open bed. So you might have a giant sculpture. You might have, for the natural history museums, you might have a dinosaur that you need to move. And so the lowboy tractor is a good option for you. And just a few images here. This is what we refer to as a high cube. This is the tractor trailer. You see a lot of these on the road. It might say VIP or it might say Mayflower. These are technically not fine art shipping companies, but their trucks meet our requirements. And sometimes you need these to ship very large, long pieces or an entire exhibition. And then you have the straight truck. This is a typical one in Europe. This is the most commonly used truck going around interstate wise. And then this is what I'm referring to in the Sprinter van. We see these all over. Lots of different companies use this for their convenience. So what type of trucking services are there? Well, as I mentioned, the interstate shuttles. These are preset dates that depart warehouses. So you really need to take a look at your schedule and decide when is it that you need it arrived at your destination and work backwards from there on your deadlines. And as I mentioned, a lot of companies have these on their website. I believe off the top of my head, Cook's Crating has it, Gander and White, Atelier 4. So you can kind of get an idea of the timeframes regarding those. You also can have a what we call a LOFO. This is potentially on a shuttle or one that has less stops, but it's last on, first off. And this might tie into a loan requirement that you have. So, for example, the museum might want to have their crate handled as minimally as possible, but you're on a really tight budget, so you might offer to them and ask them if they would approve a LOFO. And most likely, the registrar on the other end will be working with you and allow this. Now, the most expensive trucking service out there is an exclusive use, and the name says it all. Basically, your entire shipment is on that truck by itself. It could be one crate or it can be several crates. And unfortunately, some institutions do require this when they have a high value artwork on loan. But once again, if the crate is of a convenient size, you can maybe negotiate during your loan negotiations for it to be a LOFO versus exclusive use, and you could save anywhere for about $20,000. These are very expensive. Now, I just want to mention, as we're talking also about best practices when it comes to fine art shipping, the museum standard requirements. So you want to make sure that when you're requesting a truck, that it has dual drivers, air ride, climate control, and a lift gate. Now, climate control might just mean temperature, but then once again, that ties into your loan requirement, whether or not the lender requires an RH as well. But climate control, their HVAC systems, oh, I know, they're sometimes called reefers on trucks. That's sort of an old term. And so these are the standards worldwide of what's required. I also made a little note there about value disbursement because we're going to touch upon that when we talk about insurance, but keep that in mind when you're also requesting a truck shipment. Now we're going to talk about air freight. And with air freight, you also have to think about whether or not your shipment needs to be domestic. Let's talk about within Northern America or international. Now, why would you ship air freight versus trucking? Well, you might have some time limitations. As you know, for exhibition installations, usually shipments start to arrive anywhere between 2 to 3 weeks prior to the opening date of an exhibition. So you might have a lender who doesn't want it out of their site prior to that time. So there's no way you can include a truck shipment, which would require more weeks. So that's part of that loan negotiation requirement. Some consider it safer. A lot of conservators feel that air freight has less vibration than trucking. Um, I just want to make a side note that this year there's a lot of online um, workshops, seminars, symposiums all around Art in Transit 2.0. You can Google that and it'll come up. And so there's a big discussion about 30 years later, do we still think air freight shipment is the safest? So if anybody has interest in learning more about the scientific aspect of this decision, Art in Transit 2.0. I believe there's an online webinar from Oslo that's happening in September. Truck shipments are also not an option due to the destination. So if you're traveling from Seattle to Japan, of course, there's no truck option there. Also, it might just be a loan requirement. It might just be that the museum says, no, this is one of our most valuable pieces. We don't want it on a truck on the road. It has to go by air freight shipment. The two things that I wanted to make clear about air freight shipments. So when you're considering this, um, anything that goes on the plane has to be crated. So that's an added cost. It cannot be soft packed. You will be rejected, and no fine art shipper will pick up a soft packed object to go to the airport because they know they won't be received. So just consider that when you're considering air freight. All air freight on wide body planes also have to have TSA screening. That's internal within the museum if your museum is certified, or you can do this via a certified fine art shipping company. And the company that you choose, the shipping agent, will advise you as to how this process works because sometimes there is an additional day that you need to factor into your schedule for this process. So with air freight, you have two options: wide body passenger flights or cargo freighters. Whereas with trucking, you had a few more options than that. So this is what I refer to as a wide body passenger plane. You can see down below the circular, you have containers. Sometimes there's pallets there. And then on top, you have the passengers flight. So this is what we refer to as a wide passenger plane. And it can load up to crates up as high as 63 inches, but no more than that. So I recall many times when we would book a shipment, the lead handler would call me and say, Jacqueline, uh, do we need to do the midnight flight? Because I just found on Expedia all these other flights that are available during the day. And I would say, well, yes, but those are not considered wide body planes. They cannot take on cargo. They can take on luggage, but not cargo. So just be aware of that. And your shipping agent will inform you all the options for wide body planes that are available for you. This is, as you saw underneath the passenger area, you saw the LD3 container. This is, you see them rolling on the tarmac in like a little train that's going to the airplane. So sometimes your crate will be locked into that. Sometimes you're, depending on the size of the plane and the size of the cargo area, your crate will also be palletized. So this is a pallet. Think of it as, we call it the cookie sheet. And there's various different sizes. And when your crate goes onto a plane on a pallet, the process for getting it prepared is called palletization. So here you see that they've already placed it on the cookie sheet. They lay down some plastic beforehand. They're in the process of, you can see them tying it down to the pallet. And then what will happen after this is they'll completely wrap it in plastic and in netting to make sure it's really solidly secured. And you can see one in the background on the right side that has been completely palletized there. And then these are the large cargo freighters. These allow crates over the size of 63, 64 inches onto the plane, but they do have a maximum height of 118 inches. Some of them do allow maximum height of about 120 inches, but you should confirm that with your agent. So Cargolux is the most well-known cargo freighter from around the world, but there are several different companies that provide this service as well. So, despite the paperwork for both trucking or air freight, you're going to have to collect some paperwork. And Dan's going to show you later on how to attach these onto your shipping records. But first of all, we have the bill of lading, which is used by the trucking companies. And this basically has the information like what are they picking up from you? They're picking up a crate. This is the size, this is the weight, it's going from this location to that location. So it's a work order for the trucking company, but it's also an important document for you to have on file. If you're doing air freight, you're going to receive, in addition to the bill of lading, because you need someone to deliver your crate to the airport, so you'll have a bill of lading for that conveyance, is an airway bill. And an airway bill is basically an invoice between the airline and yourself. And it has the process for tracking the crate, the cargo that's going to go onto their plane. So the shipping agent will submit the airway bill to the airline and get it approved for you. And so nowadays, in regards to some security measures and TSA requirements, you can request a draft of the airway bill, especially if you want the airway bill number, but you won't get a copy of the final airway bill till the shipment has taken off from its location. So I always make a little note in my calendar the day next to email the shipping agent and remind them to send me the final airway bill for my files. So you might have two copies during the shipment, but make sure you always save the final airway bill. That's very important. Also as a document, especially if you're going international. And then institutional, you probably want to have an outgoing receipt that shows that the trucking company came by and picked up this piece from you, in addition to the bill of lading. You might have an incoming receipt that you send to the lender saying, we received your crate, blah, blah, blah. Also, the shipping receipt. The shipping receipt is really important as well. And I recommend always doing a shipping receipt. And basically, you're saying to the lender, I have received your crate and it arrived in good condition, or vice versa. You want them to sign off once they've unpacked their object from their crate saying that the object arrived in good condition. And you want to make sure you keep that copy in your files as well. Now, if you're bringing in something from international ports via air freight, and it's coming in as an acquisition to your institution, you're going to receive an entry summary report. It's a form, it's a one-page document. Also, if you're doing international shipments, either way, in or out, a pro forma invoice needs to be prepared. And so if you're not familiar with international shipping, when you're talking to your shipping agent, make sure they can provide you with a template so you know exactly what information you need to fill out. Sometimes the outbound shipping agent on the other end will prepare it on your behalf or prepare it on the behalf of the borrowing institution. So they'll remind you. They won't let this, they need this for customs, so it's not something you'll forget. And then the last one that you want to have on file, if it's a requirement, is a certificate of insurance, which we will speak about a little bit later in the presentation. So here I just wanted to show you, I'm going to show you two copies of a bill of lading, so you can see that they're different. But one important thing I wanted to mention about the bill of lading is that on the back of it, it has conditions. And if you've never dealt with a BOL, I highly recommend, even if it's a draft form, let's say you decided you are going to use this particular company, ask them for a copy of the backside so that you can read the conditions and understand. They're very standard when it comes to fine arts shipping around the world, or sorry, domestically trucking. But you want to make sure you understand what you're signing off on. Here's another copy of a bill of lading from another company, Artex. So you can see they all require the same information, but they all have a different look. And once again, read the conditions. Here is a copy of an airway bill. This is for airline shipments. This is just an example. If you see on the upper right corner, you see the 3 digits 001. So that actually has about 9 digits that follow that once it's being processed. And that's important information to have in your system is your airway bill number, because that's how you will track anything regarding that shipment. And the one important thing, not only will it list the crates and the weight is important because that's how you're going to get billed for the freight volume. So you want to make sure that that matches your estimate, or if it doesn't, to determine with the shipping agent, is it going to be less or more when I get my invoice? This will also have the various tariff codes. So tariff codes determine if your object is coming in on permanent entry or whether or not it's just coming in for a temporary exhibition bond. So the tariff codes are important here. Once again, your shipping agent, who I'll talk about a little bit more later, are the experts, and they'll make sure that the right tariff code is attached to your international air freight shipment. Here's a basic shipping receipt that I just kind of share with lenders and clients at times. Basically, you have the shipment date, you're saying where it's being shipped from, where it's being shipped to, how is it being shipped? Is it air or trucking company? And you want to make sure you write down American Airlines or Cook's Crating on there. Make sure it includes the name of the courier if there is one, who's covering the insurance, the purpose of the return to the owner, or is it a loan from exhibitions? And as I said, this is a very important document to have to show that you have returned the object to that lending institution. Now, in regards to international shipments from air freight, this is what an entry summary form looks like. And these are largely used for acquisitions. And this is also very important to make sure you have the correct tariff code attached to this. In my 30-something years of doing shipments, I've only found one error. And that can be corrected. So don't freak out if it's the wrong tariff code. Just go back to the shipping agent and they will correct it internally digitally, and then provide you with the corrected entry summary form for your files. Now, once again, this is another very important document to have. Should your institution ever be questioned about illegally importing artwork, you want to make sure you have this entry summary form to show that you legally ship this artwork from Africa to New York, or wherever it's coming in from. So let's talk a little bit about transit insurance. First of all, when you're thinking, or your director, your creator has requested a shipment, make sure you confirm with your broker what your transit coverage limit is. For this scenario, we're going to say it's 1 million. Okay, so that means that for every shipment you do, you cannot exceed 1 million in value of artwork. You can have several different shipments happening in 1 week. Like say, let's have you have one on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Each one can be 1 million, but each conveyance leg cannot exceed the 1 million. So I hope that makes sense to you. Um, you need to confirm who's covering transit. If someone is borrowing something from your institution, the norm is that the borrower covers the transit insurance, uses the term nail to nail. So the moment they pick up the crate from your institution and it goes and arrives at their institution, the borrowing institution covers it. But if you're bringing in something for acquisition, you need to confirm who is covering that transit insurance. You also, if you get a request from a curator to ship something from a country that might be having some political instability, you want to make sure your insurance covers that excluded country or not. So that's where you need to kind of know your policy or, send an email to your broker and say, I have this complicated shipment happening. Can you confirm that our policy covers it? I also want to say that COIs, certificates of insurance, if they are required, you should try to receive them at least 2 weeks prior to the shipment date. That'll give you a few days or a week to confirm if the information on that certificate is correct. Is it the correct artwork? Does it have the correct inventory number? Does it have the correct value? And so if there are any errors, you have a few days to have that corrected. Excuse me. I also want to say that I've had situations where an institution would not let a shipment leave because they hadn't received the certificate of insurance. Now, even though 3 months prior, we did the whole policy coverage of what kind of insurance we have. So I really it tells me that the registrar on the other end is not well versed in shipments because the certificate of insurance, think about it as if you have Progressive car insurance and you have that little card in your wallet that just says, this is my policy number, this is what I have, these are the dates. Think of a certificate of insurance just as that. Just because they didn't provide you with a certificate of insurance, it does not mean that their policy is in effect. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about shipment estimates. Now, for air freight, most museums in the United States use Deedle or Masterpiece. Those are the two main companies. I know there are other fine art shipping companies that also have trucking and warehousing, and they provide customs clearance as well. But just note that Deedle and Masterpiece, their shipping brokers, are certified, whereas many of these trucking companies have to use third parties to process the customs paperwork. In addition, Deedle and Masterpiece agents are really available to you 24/7 because they're and trucking company agents are usually only available 9 to 5. And as we know, shipments occur at all hours of the night and day. And so you really want to be able to have an agent who's going to be able to answer you at any hour of the night should something go wrong with your shipment. One time for loan requirements, I did have to use a fine art shipping company for air freight, and there was an issue and that person wouldn't pick up their phone after 5 o'clock. So I was really stressed, and it was a good example for our department to realize, okay, we can't use these companies for custom clearance. So once again, Deedle or Masterpiece would be your preferred shipping companies for air freight. Now, what should you provide the agent when you write to them and say, Dear Amanda, I need our Frank Stella print to be shipped to New York. So you want to make sure you don't only write that in your email. And I say that because the agents have told me that sometimes registrars just say that, and then they have to go back and forth asking them for every single piece of information. Um, so if you want to be considered an experienced shipping registrar, you want to make sure you provide all this information. You might not want to say exactly where it's being picked up when you're just doing an estimate because you might do more than one estimate, which is good due diligence on our part. So you might just say, okay, it's being picked up from the 931 area code and it's going to be delivered to, I don't know, 3010. You need to provide them when do you need it to arrive at this destination because that'll determine whether it can go on the truck or whether it can go on air freight, depending on your time frame. You want to also, you don't need to tell them exactly what the object is, but tell them what it is. It's a large painting. The painting measures this. You don't need to tell them it's a Picasso. You need to tell them who's covering transit insurance so they're aware of which entity is going to be covering that. You also want to confirm whether or not on your shipment you're going to require a courier. And we'll talk a little bit more about couriers later on in the presentation. You also want to provide them with any loading dock scenario at both ends. If you have arrival instructions for your dock, especially we find these very useful when museums are located in universities, since the campus is so large, you want to make sure they know how to get to your dock. Um, or it's just an unusual dock situation on the other end. It helps then determine also what kind of truck can be used. It'll also help them give information to the drivers when the shipment has been booked. You also want to provide them with any loan requirements, specifically regarding trucking. Does your lender require exclusive use, or can it go on as a regular shuttle, etc.? Um, if it's going and you want to provide dimensions for any kind of packing, whether it's a crate or soft packing. And you want to make sure you indicate the height because that's initially the first important object of information for shipping. So you want to provide them, if you provide them with all these points, they're not going to have to, like they might have a question or two for you afterwards, but this is going to be provide them with enough information for them to provide you with an estimate. And I also want to say regarding shipping estimates, and give them some time. You're not their only client or potential client. For trucking domestic shipping estimates, I usually give them about a week. For the international shipping estimates, I give them 2 to 3 weeks because not only are they trying to gather information about um, getting it from your location to the nearest airport, but they also have to email Europe and wait for them to respond. And you just don't know how busy the agents are at a time. So estimates are not super quick, but they shouldn't take longer than 3 weeks to get back to you. Now, when it comes to air freight shipments, I have a really strong recommendation. Um, is that you hire tarmac security for your air shipments. These are private companies that are authorized to go onto the tarmac. They're authorized to go behind the yellow line at the cargo warehouse where no one else is allowed to cross that line. They can also remain with your pallet or your container at all times, and they can witness it being loaded onto the plane and confirm to the shipping agent when the plane has departed, or as they say, wheels up. So this is important because at the airport, especially if you don't have a courier, they can keep an eye and make sure that no one's bumping into your crate. They can make sure that the crate does get onto the plane because there have been scenarios where, if you didn't know, the United States Postal Service has full authority over all freight on planes. So let's say at the last minute, your pallet is on the plane, the doors are about to close, and here comes the United States Postal Service. They can stop the plane, have your pallet or whatever pallet they need space-wise removed from the plane, and have the mail put on. So you want to make sure you have the tarmac security person who can immediately call the agent and say, hey, so-and-so's pallet's being removed because of priority postal service. So they're not very expensive. They are worth every penny you pay for. So I highly recommend if you're doing an air freight shipment, whether it's domestic or international. That's probably one of my strongest recommendations. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about art couriers. So on cargo freighters, these are the least friendliest to couriers. And this is a Latin American cargo freighter company. So this is what most passenger areas look like for cargo freighters for like planes that were built maybe 20, 30 years ago. So this was an older plane, but still functioning. You basically had those little jump seats that you can sit on. You see the little wine cooler there, that's your pantry. There is no airline flight attendant service on there. You man for yourself. On this particular flight, the pilots kindly told me that there was a bunch of sandwiches in that cooler and um, that I was able to have some if I wanted to. But considering how arduous the trip was, I decided not to partake in that sandwich fest. And so and if you know the scenario beforehand, which once again, Deedle or Masterpiece will advise you on, you can bring your own food onto the plane, which is usually what I do. Um, Now, if you're lucky, and sorry, this is the luggage area for those older, so you can see my handbag, my suitcase, and my business case just strapped up to the strap. And right behind those, that strapping is the cargo, like all the cargo's back there. Now, the newer freighters, this is a cargo, I think, yeah, this is a Cargo Lux plane out of Luxembourg. You might end up with some nice seating area. But the maximum is either 4 or 8. So this particular Cargo Lux flight had 8 nice seats, and I was the only courier on that flight. So the thing for cargo freighters is that if you're going to assign a courier or a courier is assigned to the shipment, they need to be processed through a security vetting process. So they need to fill out a form, they need to provide a copy of their passport, and that needs to happen anywhere between 6 to 8 weeks in advance. So make sure you keep that in mind because you can't decide at the last minute that someone's going to go on the freighter. Um, and then this is your typical business class wide body passenger flight. This is, as we know, or if you're not aware, the standards for museums is the courier flies business class when they have art that they're accompanying, and on the return flight, it's economy without art, and that's pretty standard worldwide. So, I just thought these were two fun images. So literally, when you're on a cargo freighter, you're right behind the pallets. So right where I was sitting on those jump seats, you just the door next to them, which they have locked for security reasons. I mean, they're literally just sitting there in the front. On one of my Latin American flights that I took, I had taken a nap, and when I woke up, there was this hammock in front of me, and it was one of the 3 pilots who decided he needed his 2-hour break nap, and they just set up their hammock, and he offered it to me afterwards, but I also politely declined. So it's kind of like it's a rough scenario at times, but always a great adventure. But cargo flights are definitely the toughest ones to do. So as I mentioned here, they're very long hours. When you do cargo freight shipments, you have to be at the warehouse to oversee the palletization of your crates minimum 12 hours in advance from when the flight is about to depart. So you're standing there sometimes in really cold or sometimes really hot warehouses. So, you want to make sure you're in comfortable business clothing as well. Couriers are great for going on complicated shipments when they're going to exotic locations and you have various conveyances. It goes on a truck, it goes on a plane, it goes on a ferry. So you want to make sure a courier is on that type of shipment because they want to make sure that your crate is treated properly along the way and it arrives at a destination. In regards to couriers, whether it's domestic or international, you have to have really good diplomatic skills. You're entering into someone else's museum and you just can't go in there saying, "This is my artwork. You're going to do exactly as I say." A courier becomes part of the installation team. And so you need to work with that other institution. And especially, ideally, when museums assign couriers, we try to assign couriers that speak the same language, or, English is the international business language, but sometimes there are locations where you might not speak the language. Japan, certain parts of Africa. So, ideally, someone might provide you with a translator. But having extra language skills is always a perk for us assigning couriers. Now, there are different types of couriers, and this has become much more adamant post COVID. So you have the regular courier. That's the courier that's going to go to the airport, see the piece palletized, get in onto the plane, and travel to its final destination, oversee its unpacking, and overseeing the installation of that piece at that borrowing institution. During the pandemic, it was really hard for a certain period of time to you couldn't have couriers on the planes. So there was a, a flexibility with the institutions, especially when it came to insurance coverage, since palletization and unloading are probably the two scenarios in which your crate is handled the most. You want to make sure you have a representative there to make sure that your crate is being handled correctly. So let's say I'm just going to use the scenario that LACMA is lending a large painting to MoMA in New York. But MoMA says to LACMA, we have a really tight budget. Do we need to buy a business ticket for the courier, etc.? So LACMA says no, but as long as you pay for a bookend courier at LA and a bookend courier in New York, we're fine in waiving having a courier on the plane. And just so you know the amount of money, so a business class from LA to New York can range anywhere from $3,500 to $5,000. So the institution saves a lot of money. Plus, they don't have to pay for that 2-night courier hotel or the per diem on the other end. So they can save quite an amount of money. And the bookend courier in the United States is usually a hired registrar, a contract registrar, or it could be someone from the lending institution that can go to the airport and oversee that part, that task about that shipment. Now, the third one that really flourished during the pandemic and is still somewhat used out there is the remote courier. The remote courier is someone who will get onto their laptop via Zoom, like we are today, and watch as they unpack and install the artwork at the other end. Um, During the pandemic, as you can imagine, these were being used left and right. And so there was a lot of information provided out there on how to properly use a remote courier. But they're being used less and less. I think for a large exhibition that I did last year at a major institution, we had one request. And it was a traveling exhibition. So they saw that their artwork was being properly handled. And so they waived that remote courier requirement for the rest of the venues. But these are generally the three different couriers that are used nowadays. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about some courier scenarios and shipments that I've had. So this is, if you guys know the director Guillermo del Toro, we had a traveling exhibition for him in Mexico in 2019. So as a courier, especially when you travel to international venues, a lot of these venues are in these beautiful renovated buildings from the turn of the century or maybe even 500 years old. So they don't have what we're used to in America or newer buildings, proper freight elevators. And so sometimes you have to move crates in a very odd location. Luckily for us, I think Deedle was the agent for this shipment in the United States, and we contracted Cordoba Plaza in Mexico, who is one of the top shipping companies in Mexico. So they were well versed. I wasn't necessarily nervous, but I was a little anxious when we were moving this crate up the stairs in this manner. But I knew that thing would happen. They had really strong guys. And so when you're actually doing this type of shipment in foreign countries, unlike in venues that have a loading dock, you're going to have to hire a lot more art handlers. So of course your fee might be a little bit higher for the scenario. Now, in regarding this particular exhibition, this is a pressure capsule from one of his movies. Now, this weighed a minimum, I think it was 3,000 pounds. It's all metal. And as you can see on the slide on the left, to move it around, we had to use a forklift because the guys just didn't want to break their backs in moving this. So the reason I'm mentioning this to you is because we're going to talk about dimensions later on. So when I emailed my Mexican counterpart, uh, I indicated to her that it was inches. Um, she decided to do whatever she was going to do to convert it into centimeters on her end, but she must have done a bad formula because when we got to the museum, there was no doorway for us to get through. So we had to kind of get creative and get it through a large window. They actually had to demolish part of the bottom of the window. And then once we got in there, I said to her, "What gallery is this going in?" And she's like, "It's going up on the second floor gallery." And I said, "Okay, where's your freight elevator?" And she's like, "Oh, we don't have a freight elevator." And I said, "Do you know that this weighs 3,000 pounds?" And so the entire crew said, "We're not touching this. It's gonna slide off on us and crush us going down the stairs." And the stairs were these beautiful Rococo, like think of like a big swirl, gorgeous, but there was no way they can safely turn this giant crate around. So on the spot, we had to remove it from the exhibition. We already had paid that freight volume for it to be shipped down to Mexico. So you can tell, the curator was not happy, but I wasn't at fault. So, but still, it was kind of a shame. The other fun locations that we do shipments to are Venice, Italy. So people always say, "Well, how do you get your crates?" He's like, "Well, they only use boats. They don't go on gondolas, but they go on what they call cargo boats." And so unfortunately, I wasn't able to upload this really fun video that shows you um, moving crates up onto the second floor, but I did find this image on the right-hand side that kind of shows you how these small boats have these cranes that literally move things around and up on different floors. So, you think about what's the worst thing to do is, well, put my crate on a little tiny boat and go through canals. But that's exactly how all the museums in Venice have to deliver or ship their crates onto to their institutions. It's really I always say to young professionals, if you can get a trip to Venice, not only because it's Venice, but just watching the shipment happen can be just really an exciting scenario there. Okay, so some other things to consider, and I'm gonna try to rush through this, Dan. I've been running a little bit over time. I always like to mention this whenever I'm training young registrars. Your shipping labels. You should use acronyms when you're putting together your little shipping label. There's no reason to put J. Paul Getty Museum or the Museum of Modern Art. You want to minimize the amount of information for anybody to realize, oh, there's artwork in there. So use an acronym. When you use the delivery address as well, make sure you confirm, are you delivering to the museum or are you delivering to an offsite warehouse? Because that has happened where that person didn't confirm that information and then the truck had to do a second conveyance over to the warehouse. Use obviously the contact name, the name of the registrar on the other end, and telephone number, but you don't need to put her title. You don't need to put Associate Registrar of Exhibitions. You can just put her name and her telephone number. Because on all your crates, even your soft packed material, the shipping company is going to put their own label on there as well, because they want to make sure they have the correct information. But I'm referring to your basic, 8.5 by 11 shipping label that you slap onto your crate to make sure it remains as anonymous as possible without deleting any important information. Okay, so artwork dimensions. As I mentioned, that scenario in Mexico was not ideal. So museums, when we provide object checklists, our dimensions are usually like 100% start off on height, then width, and then by diameter or length or whatever. You also want to make sure when you're typing in your information to the shipping agent that you indicate it's in inches or in centimeters. That's one question they might come back to if you don't indicate, saying, Barbara, is this in inches and centimeters? Because they want to make sure they estimate correctly. And someone did ask me once, well, why height first? And I think it has a history to do with the old databases. that I think whoever created the first database template used height. And so it kind of just has stayed that way, right, Dan? I mean, it hasn't changed
I
at
think
all,
so.
right?
Yeah.
So the one funny thing that we always like with shippers, now shippers have been around longer than databases, but they always start with length and height is always the last one. So that's why you want to make sure you indicate what your dimensions are so that everybody reading your email or your checklist understands which one is the height. Because immediately the shipping agent will look at the height dimensions, determine if anything is oversized, and that changes your scenario. I also want to remind everybody that all objects have three dimensions. The only pieces that don't have three dimensions are works on paper that are unframed. They only have two dimensions. But even framed works on paper have three dimensions. The depth of the frame is important also. And especially if part of your shipment is to have a crate fabricated. So hence the importance of those dimensions. Okay, so I mentioned earlier on as we began this talk that we were going to talk about best practices in museum fine art shipping. So, sea transport. Sea transport is frowned upon in regards to museum shipments. They're ideal if you have a traveling exhibition and you have the time. Fine to put the exhibition furniture on a container. Just know that the time frame can be anywhere to 3 to 6 weeks, especially if you're transporting in Europe. It has to go through various locations where right now the political situation is really uneasy, and so that adds delay time to your shipment. It is very economical in comparison to air freight shipments, but it is difficult to get an exact delivery date. Your agent might say it's arriving the week of March 23rd, but they can't tell you which day or what hour. Um, Also, your container can be handled kind of roughly. So if you're going to send anything in a container, it should be really, really sturdy, and the inside of the container should be braced really well with 2x4s. It's also impossible to supervise loading and unloading because they could be loading your container at 3 o'clock in the morning. It just depends on when their work order says. And there's a lack of security at the ports, so you never want to ship high value pieces. Also, there's the issue of upper versus lower deck. You can ask the agent to make sure your container's on the lower deck to make sure that when there's rough seas, it doesn't get toppled off on the top. But I recently learned a year ago that that's not always true. They'll tell you they're going to try lower deck, but they cannot guarantee that. There are some containers that have reefers like HVAC systems, but the majority do not. You pay extra for that. And I believe the majority do not have RH control. So you want to also make sure if you are forced into using a sea transport for artwork, you want to check with your insurance broker to make sure that that's coverage and not an exclusion. Hand carries are rare these days, more so because whenever you're going through TSA, you're going to get your package opened up. No longer can a security officer escort you to your gate, which was done so in the days behind. Thirdly, the couriers have to carry this piece with them to the bathroom, down the hall. They have to have that piece attached to their hip at all times. And think about it, you might have your own carry-on bag because you're going to have extra time in that country, or you're going to have your handbag. So you're going to have a lot to carry, but you're always going to have to make sure you have that hand carry in hand. So hand carries in museums are very rare nowadays. Common carriers. So I mentioned to you before that you might have a budget constraint. And so I just want to say that um, I use this image because that's basically where your box is going to be traveling. It's going to be thrown around in different warehouses. And common carriers are sometimes part of your exclusions or restrictions, so you should check with your broker. But I'm referring to UPS, FedEx, Post Office, DHL. There's a high risk of damage and loss, but they are very cheap, and so someone might choose to weigh the risk and use a common carrier as well. Private vehicles, you should check with your insurance policy to see whether or not private vehicles are covered for transport. So how do we track all this information? We use databases, we use email threads, people use Excel spreadsheets. But today we're gonna, Dan, and I'm sorry I ran over, we're gonna use CatalogIt. And so Dan, go ahead and take over from now. I'm gonna
Okay.
stop sharing.
No problem. Yeah, and there have been a few questions, so I'm just going to quickly show how you would do this and catalog it, and then we'll get to the questions here. So we might go a few minutes over, but hopefully not too much here. So let
Okay.
me just share my screen here. Okay, so I think quite a few of our attendees are familiar with Catalog and they kind of know what it looks like. So this is what it looks like when you log into your Catalogit account. But let's talk specifically about how you would track shipping. So I'm going to click on my main menu here, and I'm going to go to my profiles. So again, if you're familiar with Catalogit, we have these icons for kind of the most common profiles. But you can search. There's lots of other profiles in here. So I'm going to search for ship. And as soon as I start to type, you can see it starts to filter here. But I'm going to look at shipment profiles. So we've got a couple in here. So let's take a look at one that's fairly complete in CatalogIt here. And you can see that it assigns a number to the shipment. And then here's all the details of this particular shipment. You can see the shipping receipt that Jackie had shown earlier. I've attached one of those here. Down here, I've also got the bill of lading here as well attached. So your documentation is attached there as well. And then here's the details of this particular shipment. Who was the recipient? When did it ship? Who was the carrier? Who was the agent? In this case, Jacqueline was our courier. Handling instructions are documented here. And the shipment profile, just like other profiles in Catalog, it relates across to all the other related records. So down here, you can see that here are the pieces of art, the entries specifically that are related to this particular shipment. This shipment is also related to a particular exhibition. It's related to an outgoing loan. I can click on this and go on into the outgoing loan record and see that. So this is where your shipment records live in CatalogIt. And again, they're also attached all the way back to the level of each individual item in the shipment. Now, Jackie wanted me to quickly show how to create a new one here. So again, I'm going to go to my shipment profiles here and I can click the plus. It's going to automatically assign my next one here. And now I can go through and just start attaching all the information in here. I'm not going to go ahead and complete this in the webinar right now, but for instance, to talk about how you attach documents. Down here at the bottom, there's things you can click on to attach things. This little paper clip allows me to attach files there. So if I click on that, it's opened up my Finder in my computer here, and I just need to attach the documents that I want to attach. So let's go ahead and attach the customs form, for example, here. So it's a PDF document. CatalogIt's going to actually create a view of the front page of the PDF, so you know what that document is here. So, and that's how you can attach documents. So the shipment record is a really handy place. It's got all your data in there. It's got all those references to all the other things. It's a place where you can easily go back and forth and double check things, to verify things. A simple thing to have handy. And I should also note that, anything you're doing in CatalogIt, of course, those of you that are using CatalogIt know that you can also use your phone. And so imagine anywhere you're traveling, you have quick access to all these documents, all this information right there directly from your phone. So I'm not going to go ahead and create this one here, but I'm going to cancel out of it. And let's just take a look back at this one again. So again, I can look at, for instance, one of the entries that's a part of this shipment. So here's my entry itself. I'm going to scroll down here a little ways in the entry. Down here, I have got the exhibition it's in, but here's shipping. It's got a particular crate that it's attached to, but it's also part of that shipping record. So I can click on that and it gives me a snapshot into the shipment. Here's the other records that are attached to that shipment. I can go on this link here and then go right back into my shipment record there. So it's all nicely contained there for you and easily accessible. So with that being said, we're just about time. I'm going to stop sharing. And Jackie, I'm going to mention a couple of these questions here so we can hopefully get through these really quickly here. One of them I thought was kind of interesting. Is a high cube the same as an exclusive? So this is from back when you were talking about the different kinds of trucks.
Yeah. The high cube is a shorter truck than the tractor trailer. The tractor trailer is about, I think it averages 53 feet in length. So the high cube is just a good one to use for if you have a large crate. And so when you're considering shipping, and you contact the trucking company, I would just confirm, because it's amazing how many dimensions are off by an inch or two, depending on the type, the brand of truck they have.
Right.
Mercedes versus a Ford truck. So you always want to confirm that. But the tractor trailer is 53 feet in length.
Okay. And the high cube, I think, is also tall. It's taller than the
It's taller
typical
than the
53-foot
truck. Yeah.
container. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Another question. Is crate banding mandatory for cargo shipping?
Uh, it changes. So once again, when you're talking to your deedle or masterpiece agent, ask them if that needs to occur. If your institution has a banding machine, which is those little carts that you roll around, you can band beforehand, or the shipping company that picks up your crate can bring along a banding wrap and they can do it for you on your behalf. It's like $50. It's not very expensive. But that is a question that I always ask of the agent. Just remind me, are we doing banding this time? There are certain things that flip-flop depending on the government.
Okay.
So,
Uh,
yeah.
well, another question I think is actually a really good one. It's something I think you touched on a little bit there, but maybe you could talk just real briefly about how the insurance requirements can influence the shipping method.
Well, okay, so the insurance broker, the insurance agency, has a lot of trust in museum registrars when it comes to shipping artwork. They really see us as the experts when it comes to that. And so it's a matter of trust. The only impact that the insurance policy will have is your value limitation. Like you cannot put more than $1 million worth of art on one truck. Excluded countries, if it says, these 10 countries, Iran, Iraq, you know where I'm going, are excluded countries this year. If you ship to those countries, they won't cover that conveyance transit limit there. So they really entrust the museum registrars to know what we're doing. Um, you can consult with your insurance broker. They're well versed as well. But really, those are probably, I would say, uh, two of the or three, the common carriers. That's right. If you really have to use a common carrier because of your budget, let your broker know. Let them confirm whether or not it's a restriction or an exclusion. So they can kind of walk you through it. And if you do need to send it through a common carrier, they might make a recommendation what type of packaging you should use. Your insurance broker should be your BFF when it comes to your collection in all manners, but you could always refer to them. What is the current issues with our policy and this type of shipment?
All right. Yeah, and we're a couple minutes over, but I'm still going to bring a couple more to you here. Someone's asking, particularly, for smaller institutions, what sort of criteria would you use to determine whether or not you really need to have a shipping agent?
Okay, so as I mentioned on my slide, and if we didn't mention it before, everyone who's on this webinar is going to receive a copy of that presentation. And so it'll have my notes on there. If you're doing air freight, use an agent. I heard, I actually was somewhere 2 years ago, and I heard a session being given by this young registrar up in Alaska. And she did not use a shipping agent. She booked her freight directly with the airline. And there was mistake after mistake after mistake. And it's as if she never knew there was shipping agents out there in the world. So I 250% use Deedle or Masterpiece when you're booking air freight. Now, if you're booking a trucking shipment, you can go directly to the trucking companies. You don't need Deedle or Masterpiece. And the trucking company will guide you as to what type of truck they need to use, etc. But when it comes to air freight, always use Deedle or Masterpiece.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we're already 5 minutes or so over here,
Okay,
so we'll,
sorry.
we'll cut it off here. But there's still a few more questions, but we'll forward those on, and we will get back to
We'll get answers to you. Yes.
the requesters. So once again, I thank everyone for joining us today, and I especially thank my friend Jacqueline for for putting on this presentation.
Sure.
for us, and you'll see her hopefully on additional webinars here with CatalogIt. So thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, Jacqueline.
Everyone, thank you.
Bye-bye.